Aloha, my name is Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is building scalable, risk-based security programs, and I'm here with Terry Ziemniak, a cybersecurity expert with a proven track record of building enterprise-wide security initiatives. Terry is here to share solutions on how to create and foster community of data-first protection and pragmatic solutions that scale. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. And it's nice to be here. And aloha to you too.
Aloha. So to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got into cybersecurity and your approach behind this ever-evolving world we're in today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey, my career thus far kind of breaks into three big phases. So the first, right out of college, very hands-on technical bits and bytes sort of guy. And it just so happened that I grew into a generalist very quickly. So writing code, physically building computers and networks, mainframes, all that sorts of stuff. At that point, I consider myself pretty good at a lot of things. And that was really what was necessary in the burgeoning cybersecurity industry. You need to be good at a lot of things. And it just so happened that I teed myself up pretty well for that. So then I got into a cybersecurity consulting organization and just built upon that. I was doing penetration tests, architecting big security solutions. So that kind of summarizes the first phase of the career, very, very hands-on. Second phase, then I transitioned quickly into the compliance side. So at the cybersecurity consulting group, people came around and we were doing really neat things in that group there. But some clients were asking things about like HIPAA, like, oh my God, was HIPAA and PCI. So these requirements started coming in. And businesses were realizing you need to get the security stuff properly tightened up, properly buttoned up to address these regulatory and contractual needs. And that's where I segued into compliance, which quickly led me to the executive path. So for the second phase of my career, is really have a decade of experience as chief information security officer at large organizations. So that's really where I transitioned to the technical side and more of the business. So it's business, it's risk, it's continuity, it's those sorts of things we had to address. And then the third phase, the current phase, is I'm working as a fractional executive. So I'm a fractional CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. And what I do is I work with small, mid-sized companies as that exact cybersecurity executive presence. So helping them think through how secure do we have to be, and then how do we get there? Just like what I was doing when I was a full-time executive, but doing it fractionally for a number of small companies.
Wow. And can you tell my listeners, really what is the actual risk here? I mean, in terms of the larger the company, and now I know there's new regulations where a CEO, as a for instance, is responsible for their data and the security. And if they leave the organization, they still could be subject to penalties even in the future.
Well, there's a lot of risks, and that's kind of the key point. This is now a business risk. It is no longer considered a technical issue of if you buy a widget, you will be secure. It's a business risk. And there's a lot to that business risk. To your point, there could be personal liability. There's cases where individual CISOs, security executives, potentially were prosecuted for making bad decisions in the security program. Some of the regulations hold executives responsible for cybersecurity. But even in addition to the individual level of liability, you have business liability, you have contractual obligations. So the risks are you could have outages, you could breach of contract. There's all sorts of risk issues, fraud risk, identity theft risk. So there's really lots and lots to it. To your point, Anna, there really is a new band of risk, which is in many cases executive level liability for these cyber that's coming, no doubt.
Right. So what's your first step in identifying what someone really needs to protect themselves? Is it by industry?
Yeah, well, it really comes down to if our objective is to manage risk and to kind of understand and get to the right level of security. And I use the phrase secure enough. We have to understand secure enough. You need to start with where you at. And I'll tell you, most small and mid-sized businesses that I engage with, the vast majority have a problem. They don't understand their stuff. So they don't know exactly where their data is. They don't know their contracts. They know the people, their devices, their partners. So if you have a general sense of who your partners are, but have you reviewed the contracts? You generally know what your devices are, but are properly secured. Do you have a temp that has a legacy account, a temporary employee has a legacy account? So you really start with an understanding of what do you have and what are you dealing with? What's your stuff is kind of the phrase that I use. But that then transitions to you need to understand where you need to be. And I'll tell you, there's an interesting pivot over the past 5 years on about clarity on where businesses need to be from a cybersecurity point of view. In the old days, 10 years ago, was we need to be secure enough to deal with this nebulous risk of cybersecurity that we hear about all the time. Nowadays, small businesses, if you look, you pay attention, you can really understand what your obligations are. We were talking before we spun up the podcast about the California regulations. Maybe GDPR applies to you. So there's regulatory expectations to help you define how secure you have to be. There's contractual obligations. If you're doing marketing for a company, if you're taking perhaps lists of identifiable information, these contractual obligations will help you understand where you have to be. In many cases, to complete your cyber insurance application, you have hopefully we all have cyber insurance to a certain degree, but all those applications, again, set down expectations so that cyber insurance application helps you understand how secure you have to be. Maybe you have investors, you have partners. The point is, there is clarity now. It may be hard to get to, but there's more clarity in how secure you have to be than there's ever been. So take time to understand that, because that becomes your goal or your line. Or at least your measure of how good your security has to be. Realizing once you get there, you have to maintain it, obviously. But again, the big pivot is there is clarity if you look deep enough to understand where you need to be.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good tip. We do the same kind of thing as like we call it a data map, right? For like where does what software do we have? How's it being used? What data is there? What systems connect to each other? And then one of the things that I tell clients is really with today, should we be collecting all the data we are collecting?
Mm.
'Cause I think that we've just gotten in the habit, and marketers, are one of the ones at the top of the list of people who abuse and don't want to hold on to data. We're like hamsters. We're like collecting it and we need all this data. Well, but do we need the data? How are we using it? And is it just becoming a risk situation? And one of the kind of examples that I like to give is, a lot of people don't know what the subject right request is and what the rights are in California, as a for instance, where I, as a consumer, should have the right to be able to come to a company and say that I want my data corrected. I mean, as a for instance, I've had an AT&T account for 10 years. They still say my name with one N when I log in, right? So I should just be able to get my data corrected. That's possible. Or, what do they have on me? And based off the reason that they're asking, we may have to give it to them or not. But, then it comes down to, well, what are we collecting and should we? I mean, are we collecting an employee's marital status? Do we need to? Right? Are we collecting a gender or their social background or religious preference? Should we?
Mm.
Because, what are we doing with that data? Is it necessary for their job role? And because I'm going to say now in the future, the answer is less is more when it comes to potential risk. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, when I engage with companies, I right off the start of the agreement, the engagement, I try to position this as a data protection concept as opposed to a cybersecurity. Data protection includes security, but it also includes privacy and then maybe regulatory legal issues. But under that umbrella of data protection is data governance, which is exactly what you're describing. What is our data? Where does it come from? Where does it go? What are the contractual obligations? What are the regulatory obligations? Think through that. You get a detailed inventory of your data and what you can and can't do with it, what the protection expectations, end of life. How long should we keep the data?
Right.
Questions like that. Because if you have that governance concept in place, then when you want to look at the California law, you can apply it to your governance structure and say, yep, we're fully compliant or we're not, or GDPR, or California has its laws. I guarantee you that the other states are making them as well, and they may well be a little bit different than what California has. So they may have multiple laws. So start with a good inventory and a governance structure. So at least you have a sound understanding of your data and its uses, so you can ensure it meets your regulatory requirements.
Yeah, what is I think one of the big concerns we always have, or I see as a conflict for clients is, you talked about the contract with the third party, and how frequently they update their contracts. And do we have, what is their right, or I mean, we always see that when how many times a day do you have to update software and you have to just accept a term of service, right? Are there things that even an individual or business should be doing, like an annual audit to see if anything's changed? Do they have rights to ask what has changed in an agreement?
Well, I think there's the general terms and conditions sort of agreement, like when you use Microsoft Office 365. But those will change, and you're right. You should be looking at it, but honestly, no, no one does.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be a bad idea to do. However, though, Anna, if you go back to data governance concepts, and in your data governance structure inventory, you see that you are perhaps using client information in Excel in 365. That tells you better be looking at the terms and conditions for 365. If you had no critical data in 365 as defined in your data governance inventory, then maybe you don't have to be as detailed. So maybe another advantage of this data governance concept, you know where your data's at, which helps you understand then what's an important system, what's a critical system, and perhaps what's a not critical system. If you don't put critical data in 365, you probably can spend a little less effort in managing it than perhaps you would Amazon or I don't know, wherever else your data may be. If you know where your data is at, helps you understand the level of security required for the systems.
And what would you consider critical? Are we talking about anything, I know we have, IP and there's name and address, phone number, email. Is there anything critical like a birthday, an ID? What is that for the listeners?
Well, it's kind of all over the board. I hate to say it depends, but it depends. So, for example, um, HIPAA with medical information, the same data has different levels of criticality depending on who has it, where it came from. So, if Susie Q is pregnant and uses maybe a pregnancy tracker app on a website somewhere, that may not be HIPAA governed data, but that same information at her, I don't know, doctor is going to be HIPAA data. It's governed by HIPAA. So to make it more complicated, it isn't so much the structure of the data as who's using it in many cases. So I hate to say it varies, but it varies. That being said, generally said, anything that's identifiable, you're going to want to protect. So again, back to data governance. If you know what that data is, you got to figure out what regulations covered. If it's identifiable, you're going to want to protect it. And protection means encryption. It means limited access right. It means proper authentication, but also watches tracking the data. Can the data go someplace? Does it get sent someplace? Where does it go? Another piece people miss a lot on data protection is end of life. So if you have a contract to do perhaps marketing for a company and it's a 90-day contract and you're done, are you purging the data when you're done? You got to get rid of the data because that's where companies get in trouble. And that's actually where a lot of the AI folks are getting in trouble. I have your data, I've accumulated it. Hey, it just occurred to me, I had a lot of value now. I have this data, I can throw in my AI engine and build some really cool widget or whatnot. But are you authorized to use the data in that fashion? Typically, your authorization to use the data ends as soon as the contract ends. So be prepared to know where the data is and purge it accordingly.
How does that apply to plugins or applications? I mean, if I download a plugin or an app on my phone, like you made a comment about a pregnancy app, and now I, delete my account, that data, as long as it's stripped of my identifiable information, can they use it for, different types of learning?
Well, that's all part of it. It's contractual protection. So if I open an application and in the terms and conditions says, hey, Terry, everything you do, we're going to grab and we're going to make money off of, they can do that. Now, if it says we will purge it after 30 days and they don't, that's when the FTC gets involved. So if you see the FTC regulations, they're the ones going after basically companies that say we're doing something, but they don't. But it's perfectly legitimate to say, we're just going to take your data, everything you give us, we're going to sell and make as much money as possible. So it's that kind of contractual obligation as part of the terms and conditions.
So how do companies, navigate all this? Is there third parties that you can use to confirm or deny how they're going to use your data?
As a consumer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking okay, I have apps and I want to use an app. Is there any other kind of source of truth for you, kind of like the Better Business Bureau for, protection of data?
Well, so if you go like the Apple Store and the Google Store, they do have a measure, kind of a safety measure, or stars. I don't know what exactly it is, but those well-known stores are doing those rankings in there. So in addition to the privacy, they also do the cyber security. So they do some kind of validation, which is kind of the fees you pay to use the Apple Store. So yeah, I would go through the Apple Store and look at what's going on, because you'll see in their statements of, we use your data this way and that way. Apple distills that for you, makes it available, but you've got to read it. But again, to protect the business, and I go back to the concept of, hey, we have information on users for whatever purpose. This data will never make it into a widget. It'll never make it onto your phone. You should never put it on a spreadsheet. You don't put it in Chat GPT, for goodness sake. Those sorts of things. So as a business, if you understand your important data, put rules around that data and how you can use it. So I guess kind of two sides of that coin there.
Talk to me about we mentioned Chat GPT, and I know now with the growth of AI, everyone's talking about, we're making what we call marketing canvases for our clients of, okay, what data do we have? How do we want to use it? Is it going to be, decoupled for personalization, and then using it to create profiles or logic or opportunities for customized, personalized marketing? So, how can companies safely proceed, using AI without having to be concerned about what you just mentioned about, oh no, if it's in there, what do we do?
Well, so it's a matter of your tools. So I've got international client kind of playing with that same space. They have a lot, and it's kind of scary the amount of data that these marketing people can buy on individual user activities. So maybe a whole other conversation, but they've legally purchased and licensed to use a glob of data on individuals. What we had to say is, this glob of data is data governance. We decide this data is really important, and the data scientists have to get in to do their magic, or the marketing folks. You can come into our secure environment and do work, but you may never take it down to your laptop. You may never put it on email. You may never put it on Chat GPT. So kind of essentially putting a secure box. Workers go into the secure box and do their work, but the data never leaves the secure box, because again, data movement is very dangerous, and that's really where all your risks come in.
Interesting. So, what is one of your biggest challenges overcoming cultural change when you start working with a company? What are like the barriers, and how do you overcome them?
I, it's incumbent upon me, or any consultant, to kind of align our solutions to the culture. So, part of it is on me, or again, whoever is, to understand the culture. Again, I got some international clients, and their culture is way different from US. And I've got startup companies and some kind of wellness things that are kind of a little more free thinking than others. And I got more legacy. So I got all over the board. So it's incumbent upon me to work with leadership to have those sorts of conversations. There is no one solution, but I tell you, if the culture is not supporting you, it's not going to work. And if your leadership doesn't support the culture, it's not going to work. So, kind of right off the bat, I establish, again, I use the phrase data protection steering committee, which includes the top executives, people outside of the IT organization. So I want the CFO and the HR person and the CEO and sales to come and listen to me on occasion, saying, hey, this is what we're hearing. Here's our concerns. Here are the risk. Listen as well. But it's important for a cultural shift to get outside of IT. And I think that's where a lot of the cybersecurity and IT initiatives fail, is that if it's IT only, you're never going to shift the culture.
Yeah, and then do you have like, certain sort of training for team members? I'm just thinking about, there's so many things that happen so quickly. Like, how do we make sure that everyone understands the newest, latest, and greatest best practices without it kind of, I think one of the things that I see often that is like, and I know that it's probably necessary because of the type of organization, but there's so many security levels that it's almost impossible to work, right? Oh, you can't go to that site. You can't go to this site. You can't open, and then people can't use tools or do research. And like, how do we is there no option for a better solution?
Oh, sure. There's always better solutions. But first off, I'll make the point is, what you brought up is just reiterating the fact this is a business risk. If we want to be secure, it's going to cost you money, and it may impact your efficiency.
Mm.
But that's required to manage the risk. That being said, Anna, the types of solutions which are impactful on your end users typically indicates you're not spending money on the right tools. If you want to spend a lot of money, it would be there'll be little impact, and frankly, it'd be more efficient.
Mm.
Unfortunately, it costs a lot of money. So if sign-ins, for example, it used to be name and password. Then it's name, password, and a call to my phone. Well, the phone's not going to work because I happen to be in a subway or I'm in a basement. And then you have like scanners, and then you have the codes on your phone. So there's a lot of ways to do good solid authentication. If you spend more money, you'll have ones that work more effectively, more broadly. Like Hello Windows Business, one that scans your face and authenticates you just built into Windows. You got to buy licensing for it, but that works really well, and
Fancy.
it's quick, and it's fancy dancy indeed. But it costs money, and it requires an IT group that knows what they're doing. It requires support. Things break. How are you going to fix it? So the less expensive ones are going to, frankly, impact business, and you just got to be aware of it. But I would say one thing I'd add to that, though, is again, realize that there's tiered security. You probably don't care about, it means a scheduling application or maybe Slack. There's things you don't care about. Then there's things you do care about. You got to protect your email. You got to protect, I don't know, your website, your data. Spend the time and the effort, the resources on the stuff you have to protect. It's reasonable to expect you're going to put less effort into the things that are less important. So maybe you buy the more expensive, more efficient ones for the stuff you're worried about. So there's a tiered concept as well you can work through.
Yeah. So, I know a lot of people are always here every single day here. We're hearing about another security breach of some kind. So it seems almost like we can't catch up with these cyber attacks. You know, what is your process for me? You might get all the answers today, but then there's always some kind of loophole that can happen.
Yeah, there's always tomorrow. So if you're not improving security every day, you're falling behind, frankly, because you're right. That's if the threat intelligence. There's threats out there. You have new people every day. You have new contracts. You have new devices. That's kind of things changing within your business. The bad guys are coming up with new stuff. The techniques they're using change. So everything's really dynamic. What you're protecting is dynamic. Who's attacking is dynamic. So absolutely, it changes every day. It's not easy and it's not static. There is no good answer. Otherwise, people would be doing it.
Right. So what trends are emerging in security?
Well, the trends. Well, I'll tell you a couple. One is, as a consultant, I've seen a lot of business around the particular business problem of people bring me in to do security. In the old days, it used to be, hey, Terry, I'm generally worried about security. Can you make me more secure? Okay, we can talk about that. Nowadays, it's I can't get my prospect to sign a contract because I can't convince them I'm secure. So if you're selling into a hospital or a bank or the government or the military or whatever, the buyers have security expectations. So that's been one trend, that these contractual obligations are in place, and small mid-sized businesses are getting stuck in that concept, and they have to do a lot of work to convince the buyer that they're secure, because a breach at your service provider reflects on the big guy. So that's been one big change that I've seen. Another one would be, I guess, AI. Everyone's all about Chat GPT and that sorts of stuff. I've worked on a few projects to help companies kind of manage their AI security governance. And what we're seeing is that companies with latent cybersecurity issues are getting bitten when AI comes on board. So, for example, if you throw on Microsoft Copilot and you start asking questions about what's going on in the organization, if Terry happened to have access to the payroll information but just never knew about it, Chat GPT is going to run around like Terry and find all that information and spit it up in a Chat GPT result. So that kind of latent issue of Terry had too many access rights, no one knew about it before, but Chat GPT is going to crawl and find those things.
Oh, wow.
Similarly, if your backups aren't set correctly, if your data governance isn't set correctly, those sorts of issues are going to be made worse by Chat GPT and all its generative AI, because things are moving so quick. But yeah, if you're not really buttoned down, things are going to get bad pretty quick.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So somebody who are just starting out, and they're overwhelmed, what do you think is an easy first step?
Easy first step. Start with the idea of what's your stuff. So identify your data. Where's it at? Identify your customers and the contracts. Identify the regulations that apply to you, and start with basic data governance of what's the data, where's the data. Right. So data governance and where's your stuff is number one. Number two is protect your workstations. So typically, if you're at a small shop, you got, I don't know, 5, 10, 100 computers. It's well known and well understood how to protect computers these days. Not necessarily easy, but people know how to do it. It's not hard. Make sure your computers are properly protected. Again, the techie guys and gals know what this is, but it's your patches, it's your backup, it's your encryption, it's your passwords, those sorts of things. Make sure your workstations are secure. And then I guess third thing is realize that in addition to protecting your services and your offerings and your data, realize you have to protect your business as well. So the most likely breach is probably not going to be your application and your data set, though that would be very painful. Probably not the most likely attack. The most likely attack is going to come through your email. It's going to be a misdirect. It's going to be a malicious email. It's going to be phishing. They're going to redirect payments, those sorts of things. You got to protect your business, which is your 365. It's your Google. It's your email. It's your bank. It's your social media accounts. All those sorts of things. So realize you got to protect the business as well. I'd say those are probably three places to start.
Yeah, one of my big tips for is always to look at, I've been a couple times got someone, they didn't get my email, but they got my name, right? And then they're sending emails and texts with my name. But if you look at the email address, you can see that it's not the domain that you think it's from. So taking like a little step back and, being like, okay, it might say my name, but is the email my email?
Yeah, I tell you, when it comes to phishing and emails, but it's not just emails anymore. It's text, it's voicemails, it's Zoom calls are now being deep faked. We have legitimate looking video interactions they use for phishing effectively. Um,
More about that. How does that work?
I tell you exactly. So there was a famous story. It was last year, 2024. There was a Chinese company, and someone on the finance group got an invite to a meeting. Jumped on the meeting. Oh, I'm sorry. And it was coupled with we need to change that where this payment goes to. Didn't follow the process. So the finance guy said, no, you're not following our established process. I'm not going to make this change. That was followed up with a Zoom call. Okay. He got on a Zoom call. There was the president of the company and the CFO. They deep faked videos, meaning they made artificial videos of these men, presumably, talking to the person, convince the finance person to go ahead and reroute the information or reroute the payment, $25 million out the door. So just like you can spoof email and text, you can spoof videos, you can spoof voicemails, those voice calls now real time. So it's going to be more and more difficult with AI to authenticate a person. Who's really Terry? Email coming from Terry, most people can figure that out. A voicemail that sounds exactly like me, I don't know if my mom would know or not if it's me. So the ability to validate who people are is just going to be a train wreck. So the tip to business is have your processes established. No matter what President Terry says, don't change the bank routing information unless you follow our processes. So your sound processes have to be in place because you can't validate anybody anymore.
Wow, that's that is horrifying. That's a really great tip. Thank you for that. I had no idea. But it makes sense, and that's that poor guy who, probably felt terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess
Exactly.
the last one here is like looking ahead. How do you see cybersecurity evolving and what excites you most about the future?
What excites me is there's a lot of work to be done, and will be more and more added every day. So, paralleling with the technology changes that businesses are undertaking currently and will be undertaking. So the whole digital transformation, all the AI stuff a few years ago was cloud shifts, all those sorts of things. So as the technology shifts, cybersecurity changes. So, for me as a practitioner, I enjoy the fact that there's changes, modifications. Is not always the same thing. Um, what worries me, probably the same thing. Things are shifting very quickly. So the skills of engineers to implement the technology to protect us, that's got to grow. The tools to be built to protect us, those have to be built. Users like me and you learning that I can no longer trust a voicemail from Terry to make a change, that takes time. So the shifts required to kind of shore up our security protections, that's really where we're going to get bitten, because it just takes a while for all the stuff to happen.
Wow. Well, that was very insightful. Is there anything else you want to share before we conclude?
No, I would say maybe one quick thing for you, for your business leaders, is there's a lot of information I gave you, and there's always a lot of information out there. If you're looking to get started, go look at some well-known frameworks. So the FTC and Small Business Administration have a good one for very small organizations. And what that provides is basically, here are the 50 things you have to do. If you're a little bigger organization, if you have contractual obligations, there's a very prominent cybersecurity framework called NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework. And that's kind of the framework everyone uses. And the advantages of these frameworks is it'll make sure, did you look at contracts? Did you look at business continuity? Did you look at encryption? So they'll make sure you have a comprehensive assessment. So these frameworks are a great place to start, because again, the breadth of the review is kind of the critical thing. Because if you're really good in one set of problems, but really bad at another, the bad guys will find their way in.
Bad guys. Well, thank you so much. To learn more about Terry, you can find him on LinkedIn, or also go to NorthWonders.com. And that's another resource that you're partnered in.
Yes, actually, that was independent. I currently work, I now work at a company called Tech CXO. So NorthWonders as well as independent. But yeah, I work with Tech CXO now for a year. We're a company of fractional executives, so fractional CFOs, CEOs, CTOs, and a couple of cybersecurity gentlemen as well.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here. And for all my listeners, please join me next week as I interview another industry expert on a topic to help you succeed on and offline. I'll see you in the pixels. Aloha.